MJ Morris and Billy Edwards aren't taking the Maryland quarterback battle.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can get $5 and get a 3-week free trial on NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's a really good deal, guys. So go ahead and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. MJ Morris and Billy Edwards, neither one of them are taking the Maryland quarterback job, and I think it's honestly becoming a really concerning deal. I know a lot of people might not look at it this way, but I think the Maryland quarterback battle, even before you get really into it and you really think about how well each one of these guys are going, who's playing well, whatever the case is, it's concerning. Anytime you're going to replace Talia, who's the all-time Big Ten passing leader. He's one of the best Maryland quarterbacks of all time. A lot of people will consider him the best, has every single Maryland passing record. Whenever you have to replace that with a guy that with a new guy that hasn't had a lot of experience, of anyone that hasn't played, it's going to be a huge concern in the Maryland quarterback battle. And even though we brought in MJ Morris from NC State and he's played some ball, and Billy Edwards has been in the Maryland system now for a little bit, and Cameron Edge has now had a couple of years as well, anytime you replace a guy like Talia in that quarterback room, you're going to look at it as a concern going into the year, unless you get someone from the portal that's really solidified, that's really has their name out there and is a guy that everybody already knows is a top kind of quarterback. But when you don't get one of those guys out of the portal and you're looking at your quarterback battle as two guys that have already been in the Maryland system, that have been decent players, but we just haven't been able to see them a lot. But in terms of what we hear about them, in terms of how they played in the Music City Bowl game, in terms of Billy Edwards and Cameron Edge, is who I'm talking about, they've been solid players. They played solid in the Music City Bowl game, but outside of that, we haven't gotten to see them a lot. But the fact of the matter is that Coach Locksley didn't feel confident enough about those two. He had to bring in somebody else in MJ Morris. So even before really getting into the weeds of how guys are playing, how things look in terms of fall camp and how the quarterback play is actually going, you're going to be concerned really no matter what. Now, I am more concerned about the Maryland quarterback battle now than I was even earlier on in the year, because I feel like nobody is kind of taking it. Nobody has really separated themselves from the group, just based off the reports I read about practice and all these different things that go on at practice and the Maryland quarterback battle and who looks good, who's playing well in the scrimmage. It just seems like it's three guys, and really I focus on Morris and Edwards because I don't think many people expect Cameron Edge to be the starter, but I really look at those two guys and I say, it feels like nobody's taking it. And I feel like I could argue that by now, if there was a clear starter and if someone was really taking that job and somebody really was separating themselves and made it clear that I'm the starter, you have to play me, I feel like we might have a quarterback by now, because we're pretty close to the season opener against UConn. And I'm not too concerned about that UConn game, but Coach Locksley sounds like he's going to name a starter soon. But we're under 2 weeks now. This week's the first weekend of college football. You have a couple of games on the schedule, notably the first game of the day, Florida State, Georgia Tech play this weekend. In week 0, college football is officially back. We're under 2 weeks to go in terms of into the game against UConn. And so the fact he hasn't named the starter yet makes me a little bit concerned, because I start thinking about things and I'm like, I feel like by now you probably would want to have your starter because you want to have a guy getting first team reps consistently, and that's going to pass down, and that's a ripple effect throughout your football team because if different guys are getting first team reps and they're evenly splitting in, and I don't know exactly what they're doing because I'm not in practice every day, but clearly there's no clear starter yet because all the reports say that Loxley hasn't tipped his hand yet, and people have different opinions on who's going to be the starter. And so that's how I kind of know that it's not clear, but it's a ripple effect when you don't choose a starter. It's not just the quarterback battle or the quarterbacks that get affected. Think about it. The receivers, you want to get used to throwing the football to these guys, and the receivers want to get used to the quarterback that's going to play because they have to get a feel for where he throws the ball and how, when he comes out of his break, when should I throw it, how a receiver runs his routes. It's that type of connection that matters in terms of quarterback to receiver. And that's something that's important. And when you don't have your starting quarterback named yet, all the quarterbacks can be a little bit different. It can be small differences, but those differences can matter in the game. And so when you think about it and you say, okay, so MJ Morris and Billy Edwards, neither of them have separated themselves and they're both getting first team snaps or whatever the case may be, is then Ty Felton has to get used to two different quarterbacks and how they throw the football. And it can be different. And then same as the quarterbacks, they can't get quite where they want to be probably all the way. They're not going to be able to maximize this practice window where if somebody was getting all the first team reps and the offensive line has to get used to a play caller and who's back there, and even the running backs and when they run routes and those different things have to get used to different things. And also I think Billy Edwards versus MJ Morris and Cameron Edge, those could be three completely different offenses. Like obviously the Maryland offense has some basic stuff that they're going to run no matter what. But the game's not going to be called the same way if Billy Edwards is a quarterback versus MJ Morris is a quarterback. So when you want to start game planning and start figuring out some of these things, I think you want somebody to separate themselves. And I don't want this to just be like Coach Loxley just has to go with the guy, but he really doesn't feel confident in that decision. He's probably going to tell us, yeah, this guy's a starter, blah, 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 and I feel good about it, and I have full confidence in that player, but that's just coach's talk. We want a guy that he feels really good about, and in my opinion, if you feel really good about a guy, then you would have already picked them with under 2 weeks left on the season, because look at the quarterback battles around the country. Teams are starting to name starters. Like think about over there at Ohio State. A lot of people expected their new transfer quarterback to be the starter, but still, there was still a quarterback battle going on, and they recently named their starting quarterback over there at Ohio State. And you look at, we've heard about Boise State with Malachi Nelson, who used to be a 5-star quarterback who lost that quarterback battle, and he was named, I guess, the backup quarterback. And so teams are starting to name their starting QBs, like Ohio State, like I talked about. Will Howard is expected to be the starting quarterback. He got named the starter. Boise State, Malachi Nelson, I don't know who the starter there is, but Malachi Nelson is named the backup. Like teams are starting to announce that. There's been other teams as well that have announced their starting quarterback, and coaches are starting to say who the starter is, which is important and which tells you we're about that time where we want to have a starting quarterback. And if Coach Loxley felt like MJ Morris, or not if he felt like, if MJ Morris or Billy Edwards were really separating themselves and it was clear, I think that there's no question that Coach Loxley would have already named the starter. Because I just can't see Coach Loxley being a guy where it's like he just kind of lets it mingle and lets it go, because you don't want to have a quarterback battle forever. Like the competition part of it throughout a lot of the summer and a lot of the spring is important. It brings out brings out the best of both guys, but eventually you want somebody to take that battle. And I'm telling you, with under 2 weeks to go in the UConn game, I'm a little bit concerned. And UConn, it doesn't matter as much, and it might not show up in the UConn game, but it might show up against Michigan State. And I just think that you want somebody that has clearly taken the battle and clearly has won it. And I don't think that has happened. And I think that if that had happened, then I think that we would already know who the starter is if MJ Morris or Billy Edwards was really separating themselves. And it also sounds like Cameron Edge has played pretty well, pretty good too. So I don't know who the starter is, to be completely honest, but I know that nobody is really separating themselves, or I think they would be the starter. That's kind of my take on it. But let's get into some big takes, some bold takes that I have going into the season that I think can come true. I'll talk about that after this ad from Ibata. Sandals, sunscreen, snacks for the kids. What do these have in common? You're probably buying a ton again this summer, but don't stress about the cost. Use Ibata and get cash back on all of your purchase when you stock up on all your summer essentials. Ibata is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. So earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies and even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibata user earns $256 per year, and that could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, the flight that you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. So right now, Ibata is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibata by using the code Locked On College when you register. So just go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibata app and start earning cash back and use code Locked On College. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or Apple Store and use code Locked On College. So I think it's time we talk about some bold takes going into this year. We're under 2 weeks, and these are things that obviously are a little bit out there, but I think possibly if some things happen, can very much come true for Maryland football. I've already talked about some on here. One was that I said that we're going to beat USC at home this year. I still do believe that we have a chance to upset USC. A lot of people were like, Tre, USC, like they're better than you guys, and you got to look at what they've done too. There's no chance that you guys upset USC. And my thing was like, people were like saying that there's no chance Maryland beats USC. And I had to keep saying that's the reason it's a bold take. That's the reason it's an upset. It's because we're not supposed to beat USC. But I really did believe that we had a really good chance at beating USC for a couple different reasons. I said, coming off the Penn State game, they could be banged up. That's a really hard game to play. That's a game where a lot of different players could be banged up coming off that Penn State game. It's never easy to play that type of game against a Penn State. And I also said Maryland plays at home, which gives us the advantage. They have to fly all the way from California. And then also they have a new quarterback in Miller Moss who's talented, but still replacing Caleb Williams isn't easy. So that was just one bold take that I had going into the season, but I made it a whole segment. But here's a couple that I think are interesting that I think really possibly could happen. And I'm going to start here. If Billy Edwards is our starting quarterback, he could very well lead us in rushing. I think that's a very thing that's definitely possible when you look at Billy Edwards and what he has done when he's played. He's a guy that I've said your offense has to be a little bit different if Billy Edwards is the starter. But what he brings in terms of his size and his mobility in terms of running the football, I think could allow him to lead our team in rushing. We've seen what he was able to do in the Music City Bowl game. We know that's his game. He's less of a downfield passer, a consistent passer, but what he does in the running game is special. And a lot of you guys are probably going to be like, oh, Roman Hemby, what's the deal with that? Wouldn't he lead our team in rushing? And yeah, he probably would, but that's why it's kind of a hot take. But I believe that if Roman Hemby and Coley McDonald and Nolan Ray and those three guys and whoever else in that running back room is getting carries, and if it's kind of by committee and less just bang, bang Roman Hemby, which it's been in the past, has been more of a committee-based type of thing than just giving Roman Hemby all the carries, then I think that Billy Edwards would have a really good shot, if he's the starter, obviously, to lead this team in rushing. Just because that running back depth chart, and if it's by committee, that could get spread out in terms of the rushing yards. So Roman Hemby and Colby McDonald and Nolan Ray all might have a good amount of yards, but it might be Billy Edwards who's won in terms of that yardage with what he can bring in the running game because of how explosive he is, how big he is. Nobody really wants to tackle him, but if he's a starter, he's got to get down a little bit more. But I think the quarterback run will be huge part of our game plan if Billy Edwards is a starter, and could be something that could separate us in a lot of games if Billy Edwards is potentially the starter. Staying in the offensive side of things, staying on the offensive side, I think this is an interesting one about Dylan Wade. I think he'd be a top 2 receiver on this team. And I know he's a tight end, but I think what Dylan Wade has showed and what I think he is, I think he potentially is our best receiving target in that tight end room. I love Preston Howard. I love what he brings. I love his traits. But Dylan Wade just seems a little bit different. He seems like special to me in terms of a difference maker. And I think you can run a lot of 2 tight end sets because I think Dylan Wade is more of a hybrid. Obviously he's listed as a tight end, but I think he could pass as a receiver a lot of the time. He's not the biggest dude, but I think Dylan Wade could be a top 2 receiver on this team. I think a lot of teams are going to focus on Caden Prather and Ty Felton. That's going to be a lot of the game plan. Stop those 2 and you're going to have a really good shot. But I think teams aren't going to know as much about Dylan Wade. I think he could fly under the radar early on, and I think he could have some really big receiving games. I can see Billy or MJ or whoever the starter is really like throwing to Dylan Wade. If we saw in the spring game, we saw MJ Morris throw a really nice ball to Dylan Wade. So I can see Dylan Wade being a quarterback best friend because of his matchups, and I think he could fly under the radar, where we're looking at it 5 weeks into the season, and we could be like, he leads our team in receptions, or he leads our team in receiving yards. I could definitely see that happening with Dylan Wade. I think it's an interesting type of take. I obviously wouldn't bank on it. Like, I still expect Ty and Caden to be our top 2 receivers, but don't be surprised if Dylan Wade somehow gets himself in that conversation. Now, I want to get into some more of the defensive side of things, and there's a lot of interesting things. And my bold take is Braden Lee becomes a star freshman, and this is something that was really cool over the last, I think it was yesterday. There's been different preseason like all America freshman lists, and Braden Lee made it onto a list with a bunch of guys, like 5-star types of guys that are expected to make an immediate impact. And I know that he's not expected to start at corner for Maryland football, but I think Braden Lee potentially could end up being a starter and could be one of the best freshmen in the Big Ten. That's just a bold take. And when I was thinking about what he brings and his traits, if things aren't going well in that cornerback room, they're going to be quick to maybe experiment a little bit and let Braden Lee get some snaps. And if he gets some snaps, he might just get the job and not give it back. I think those are a couple things that I think are entirely possible, but are a little bit bold takes. But I do think they are interesting. The Maryland wide receiver room, in terms of statistics, could be down this year. I'll talk about that after this ad from FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. We all have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks free trial on NFL Sunday Ticket for your YouTube and YouTube TV. I don't know if you guys have seen, but NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV is awesome. I had it last year, and it was really great. I could have like 4 games up at once on like a multi-view screen. And I don't know if you guys are like me, but I hate missing any games, and I love to try and watch them all. And so YouTube TV allows you to do that with NFL Sunday Ticket. You can customize now the 4 games that are on your TV. So then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game, which is a big deal. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sports book. I'm not down on our receivers. I think our receiver room is probably a strength of our team, but I'm down on the projected production. If there was like a Vegas line for, Caden Prather, Ty Felton, over under yardage, I would probably hit the under because I'm looking at the Maryland quarterback room and there seems to be some momentum with Billy Edwards being the starter. I really all along thought MJ Morris was going to be the starter. Like, I felt so good about it. And now I'm like going back and forth and I'm reading different reports about a lot of the experts and what they say. And it doesn't exactly sound like MJ Morris is definitely going to, like, it sounds like people really have no idea. And we're just going to have to wait for what Mike Locksley says. But I think no matter who's in that receiver room, Maryland's identity has to change next year. We threw the ball the most out of any team in the Big Ten. All we did was just throw the ball over the field, throw the ball some more. We didn't run the ball much, but I think we have to be completely different. I think Mike Locksley said that we're going to have to be a different team this year, that we're going to have to be more of a running football team. He talked about the defensive-led team. And so that brings me to say, if there was a Vegas line on Prather and Ty Felton, I would hit the under on the yardage, on the receptions, whatever it may be. I would hit the under. For that reason right there is the biggest reason why I think we're going to be more of a running football team. Will we be successful that way? I don't know yet. But when I think about who's the starter, Cameron Edge is probably the least likely to be the starter, but he's the guy that probably would bring the highest ceiling in that receiver room. I think Cameron Edge, you'd be more confident about us chucking the ball around. And that's kind of why I believe that Cameron Edge, part of me is like he should have a chance to really be the starter because I think he's the closest thing to Talia in that room. I'm not saying he's the best player. He doesn't bring a lot in terms of rushing the ball, but I think he's the closest thing in terms of passing the football. But when I think about if Billy Edwards is a starter, I don't see a big-time passing attempt. I see a big running attack with Billy, Hemby, Ray, McDonald, and I think it could be potentially special with Billy Edwards, but I don't see a lot of big-time plays down the field. I don't see a lot of throws down the field. I don't see a lot of deep passes. I don't see a lot of passes in general. I just think you switch your identity completely with Billy Edwards at quarterback, and so that's why I'm down on Caden Prather and Ty Felton this year. They've probably improved. They probably have gotten better. I just don't see them having quite the production that they had last year, where they were top-end receivers, both top 10 receivers in the Big Ten, and they're both two of the best leading receivers coming back in the Big Ten. But I think their production goes down. Last year, Prather had 42 receptions for 666 yards with 5 touchdowns. I don't think he'll have quite that many. And you might be like, Trey, that's not even like a ton. But when it was spread out between Caden, Ty, and Jayshon Jones, like 3 guys above 650 is pretty special in college football. Ty had 48 receptions for 723 with 6 touchdowns. I just don't see it happening again. I see both of them potentially having down years. I think you got to realize that Talia's gone and those receivers are really good, but when you don't have the same type of quarterback throwing them the football, it's just not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same in terms of production and those things. And I think both of those guys are NFL types of guys. There's one person talking about Caden Prather on his content on Twitter, and I thought it was interesting, saying he's like the most underrated receiver prospect. I do believe that both of them have the traits. Caden Prather has the size and the catching ability. Ty Felton has the speed, and he has a good frame as well, where I think they're both NFL types of guys. I do wonder, though, if their draft stock gets hurt a little bit because they might not get the ball as much this year. But I think that NFL scouts are good at reading through it, and if it's quarterback play that's holding them back, then they're not going to let that stop them from selecting them. And I'm not saying that the quarterback play won't be good. I just think when you think of Billy Edwards, it's a different type of game plan. Like, it's just not the same quarterback as Talia, which will lead to more production for the running backs, but less production for our receiving crew, which I think is fair to say. And then MJ Morris, he has had limited time with these receivers. He hasn't been named the starter yet, so he's not getting all the first-team reps. So I think that when you look at through the roster is interesting, but I think also teams are going to be focusing on those 2 guys. Those 2 guys are 2 of the best returning guys in the Big Ten. Those are the 2 guys that are the engines of this offense. And when you look at it, teams are going to game plan and say they might be like, we'll take these two guys away. We'll have a safety over the top of both of them. Let's make somebody else beat us. We're not going to let them beat us for a big play, or they're not going to beat us, or we're going to double this guy on third down. Nobody else on that team can beat us. I don't know exactly, but I can see teams really focusing on those two just because of how good they are as players, and I think that'll make the team struggle a little bit more in terms of getting them the football. So I think there's a different reason why, but I'm just down on the receiver production this year. I'm expecting more of a running game, and I'm higher on Roman Hemby and Nolan Ray and Chloe McDonald to have a big year than the receiver room. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.